From the moment I stepped into that mansion, I knew something was off. It wasn't just the crumbling walls or the musty smell that clung to every corner, it was something deeper, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. My name is Elena Garque, and I've been an architect in Barcelona for over 15 years. I've worked on countless restoration projects, each with its unique challenges, but this one felt different, almost as if the house itself was alive, watching me, judging me. The mansion, once a grand symbol of nobility, now stood in ruins on the outskirts of the city, forgotten by time and shrouded in mystery. The locals whispered about its dark history, but no one ever dared to say more. They avoided the topic like a bad omen, and honestly, I wish I had taken their silence more seriously. You see, I've always had a passion for breathing new life into old buildings. There's something magical about uncovering the past, about peeling back the layers of history to reveal stories long forgotten. But with this mansion, every step I took felt like a trespass, like I was disturbing something that should have been left alone. The first day I walked through its decaying halls, I could feel a presence, like a shadow lurking just beyond my vision. I brushed it off as nerves, who wouldn't be a little spooked in a place like that? But deep down, I knew this was more than just my imagination playing tricks on me. The mansion was massive, with rooms that seemed to go on forever, each one more decrepit than the last. Dust-covered furniture, cobwebs in every corner, and walls that seemed to sigh with age. I couldn't help but wonder about the people who once lived here, what their lives were like, and what secrets they left behind. As I wandered through the rooms, I felt a strange connection to the place, almost as if it was calling out to me, begging me to uncover its story. But there was something else too, a sense of dread that hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It was as if the house didn't want to be disturbed, as if it was warning me to turn back before it was too late. Despite the eerie feeling that had settled in my chest, I pushed forward. I was determined to take on this project, to restore the mansion to its former glory. After all, that's what I do, I bring old buildings back to life. But the more time I spent there, the more I began to question whether this house wanted to be saved. The locals had warned me about the place, their faces pale as they spoke of the tragedies that had befallen those who dared to enter. But I had dismissed their stories as superstition, nothing more than old wives' tales meant to scare away outsiders. Now, though, I wasn't so sure. The mansion had a way of getting under your skin, of making you second-guess every decision. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind that rattled the windows, it all felt like a message, a reminder that I wasn't welcome here. But I couldn't turn back now. I had a job to do, and I wasn't about to let a few ghost stories stop me. So I pushed those thoughts to the back of my mind, focusing instead on the task at hand. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The house had secrets, dark, terrifying secrets, and it wouldn't be long before they started to reveal themselves. But for now, I was blissfully unaware, walking deeper into the darkness without a clue of what was waiting for me. As the days went by, I immersed myself in the work, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that gnawed at me. The mansion was in worse shape than I had anticipated, with hidden structural issues that seemed to pop up at every turn. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that were getting to me, it was the sense that something was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. One afternoon, as I was inspecting the foundation, I noticed a small, rusted door tucked away behind a pile of debris. It was so well hidden that I almost missed it, but something compelled me to take a closer look. Little did I know, this discovery would change everything. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to pry the door open. It creaked loudly, as if it hadn't been touched in decades, and the air that escaped from the other side was stale and cold, sending a shiver down my spine. Behind the door, a narrow staircase descended into darkness, the steps covered in dust and cobwebs. My heart pounded in my chest as I hesitated at the top, a voice in the back of my mind screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't resist the pull of the unknown, so I grabbed a flashlight and started down the stairs, each step echoing ominously in the silence. The basement was like a tomb, cold and damp, with the walls lined in stone that felt ancient and foreboding. As I swept the beam of my flashlight across the room, I realized with horror what I had stumbled upon. There, in the center of the room, were the remnants of old graves' cracked headstones, bones scattered across the floor, and a chill that seemed to seep into my very soul. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This house wasn't just built on top of a cemetery. It was practically swallowing it whole, and the spirits of those buried here, they weren't resting in peace. That night, as I tried to sleep, the sounds began. At first, it was just a faint whisper, like the wind rustling through the trees. But soon, it grew louder, more distinct, as if voices were echoing through the very walls of the house. I could hear them murmuring, low and urgent, but I couldn't make out the words. It was as if they were trying to communicate, to warn me or perhaps to threaten me. I lay in bed, frozen with fear, my mind racing with questions. What had I uncovered? And more importantly, what had I unleashed? The next morning, I found myself hesitant to return to the basement, but I knew I had to. I had to figure out what those graves meant, why they were hidden away like that, and what it all had to do with the house's dark history. As I descended the stairs once again, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the spirits of the dead were aware of my every move. The air felt heavier, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. I tried to focus on the work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the bones, to the eerie whispers that had haunted my sleep. Over the next few days, I continued to uncover more evidence that the mansion's foundation was built on the graves of the long-forgotten dead. The headstones bore names I didn't recognize, but I could feel their presence all around me, growing stronger with each passing day. And with that presence came a mounting sense of dread, as if the spirits were growing restless, angry at being disturbed. I began to wonder if this project was more than just a restoration, if I had, in fact, stumbled upon something that was never meant to be found. And as the noises grew louder, the shadows darker, I couldn't help but feel that the house itself was alive, feeding off my fear. It was late one evening when things took a turn for the worse. I had stayed behind to finish some work, the mansion eerily quiet as night fell. The only sound was the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath my feet, and I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling that had become my constant companion. As I focused on my work, something caught my eye, a flicker of movement in the corner of the room. I brushed it off as a trick of the light, but then it happened again, more distinct this time. A shadow, fleeting but unmistakable, darted across the wall. My heart raced as I turned to face the empty room, my eyes straining to see through the dim light. The shadow was gone, but the feeling that I wasn't alone grew stronger, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating blanket. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the long hours and stress were playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew better. Something was in the house with me, something that didn't want me there. I tried to focus on my work, but my eyes kept darting to the corners of the room, waiting for the shadow to return. And it did. This time, it was bolder, moving closer, its shape more defined. It was no longer just a shadow, it was a figure, human-like but distorted, as if it were made of smoke. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it glide across the room, its movements slow and deliberate. I felt rooted to the spot, my body frozen in place as a cold sweat broke out across my skin. The figure moved towards me, and as it did, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a faint, disembodied voice, whispering my name. I wanted to run, to get out of that house and never look back, but my legs refused to move. The figure stopped just a few feet away from me, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, slowly, it began to take shape, its features becoming clearer. I could see the outline of a woman, dressed in clothes that looked centuries old, her face pale and expressionless. But it was her eyes that terrified me the most, empty, hollow voids that seemed to stare right through me, as if she could see into my very soul. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out, my voice trapped in my throat. As I stood there, paralyzed with fear, the woman raised a hand, pointing directly at me. Her mouth opened, but instead of words, a low, guttural sound filled the room, reverberating off the walls. It was a sound I had never heard before, something primal and filled with rage. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, my head spinning as the room seemed to close in around me. I knew I had to get out of there, but I was trapped, held in place by the sheer force of terror that gripped me. It felt like an eternity, but eventually, the figure began to fade, dissolving back into the shadows. When it was finally gone, I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. My whole body trembled, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I knew one thing for certain: I had seen a ghost, a spirit tied to this house, and it was angry. The house wasn't just haunted. It was a prison for the souls of the dead, and I had unknowingly walked right into the heart of it. But even as I sat there, shaken and terrified, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Something kept pulling me back, a dark curiosity that wouldn't let go, compelling me to stay and uncover the truth behind the shadows. The next few nights were nothing short of a nightmare. The once subtle, almost playful disturbances had turned into full-blown attacks, and I felt like I was being hunted. Every time I closed my eyes, I would hear the slam of a door, the clatter of objects falling, or worse, the soft whispers that seemed to be coming from just beside my bed. Sleep was impossible, my mind trapped in a state of constant alertness, waiting for the next terror to strike. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, convinced that something was standing in the corner of my room, watching me. My tools began to disappear, only to reappear in the most bizarre places: hammers wedged into walls, nails scattered across the floor like some kind of twisted warning. And then there were the bruises. At first, I thought I must have bumped into something, maybe tripped in the dark. But as they multiplied, each one appearing without explanation, I knew this was no accident. It was as if invisible hands were grabbing me, leaving their mark as a reminder of their presence. I felt trapped, every corner of the mansion closing in on me, the walls themselves becoming my enemies. It didn't take long for the spirit's aggression to escalate. What started as whispers and shadows soon became physical assaults. Objects would fly across the room, narrowly missing my head, and doors would slam shut behind me, trapping me in rooms that felt more like cages with every passing moment. The air in the house grew thick, heavy with a malevolent energy that seemed to seep into my very bones. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just stress, that I was imagining things. But the truth was undeniable. The spirits in this house were real, and they were angry. Each time I uncovered more of the house's secrets, the attacks grew fiercer, as if the spirits were punishing me for digging too deep. I found old letters, diaries, even photographs that told the story of the mansion's dark past. The more I learned, the more I realized that these weren't just lost souls. They were vengeful, trapped in a cycle of rage and despair, lashing out at anyone who dared to disturb their final resting place. And I was their latest target, caught in a web of supernatural fury that I couldn't escape. There was one night in particular that I will never forget. I had been working late, trying to piece together the puzzle of the mansion's history, when suddenly the temperature dropped. It wasn't just a chill, it was a bone-deep cold that left my breath visible in the air. The lights flickered, and then, all at once, they went out. I was plunged into darkness, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel them, the spirits, closing in on me from all sides, their presence suffocating. My flashlight wouldn't turn on, and I was left stumbling through the pitch black, blind and terrified. That night, the spirits made their intentions clear. They weren't just angry, they wanted me gone. I felt them push against me, an unseen force that sent me crashing to the floor. I could hear their voices, louder now, filled with a venomous rage that shook me to my core. And then, just as quickly as it began, it stopped. The lights flickered back on, the air warmed, and the oppressive energy lifted, leaving me gasping for breath on the cold, hard floor. But the message was clear. I was not welcome in this house, and if I stayed, the consequences would be dire. But something still held me there, a need to understand, to find the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, I knew I couldn't continue like this. The spirits had made their anger clear, but I was determined to understand why. I spent hours digging through old records, searching for any clue that could explain the haunting. It was then that I stumbled upon a series of documents buried deep in the city archives, letters, death certificates, and legal disputes that painted a gruesome picture of the mansion's past. The more I read, the more I realized that this was no ordinary haunting. The spirits were trapped here, bound by a legacy of betrayal and murder, and I had unknowingly disturbed their eternal torment. The documents told the story of a noble family, once powerful and revered, who had fallen into disgrace. The head of the family, in a desperate bid to maintain their wealth and status, had desecrated the cemetery that once lay beneath the mansion's grounds. Graves were dug up, bodies were moved, and the land was claimed as their own. But the dead do not rest easily when their peace is disturbed. The desecration of the graves had unleashed a curse, binding the spirits to the very soul that had been stolen from them. And the most malevolent of these spirits was the woman I had seen, the betrayed noblewoman whose wrath knew no bounds. As I pieced together the story, a sense of dread settled over me. This woman, whose name had been lost to history, had been betrayed not only in life but in death as well. Her final resting place had been violated, her grave desecrated in the name of greed. And now, her spirit roamed the halls of the mansion, seeking vengeance on anyone who dared to enter her domain. It was clear that she was the one leading the other spirits, her rage fueling their attacks, her sorrow binding them to this place. I was horrified to realize that I had become the latest target of her vengeance. The more I uncovered, the more I understood the magnitude of what I was facing. This wasn't just a haunted house, it was a battleground for souls, a place where the living and the dead were locked in a deadly struggle. The noble family had paid the price for their sins, but the curse they had unleashed continued to wreak havoc, claiming new victims with each passing generation. And now, I was caught in the middle, a pawn in a game that had been set in motion long before I was born. I knew I had to find a way to end it, to put the spirits to rest and break the cycle of violence that had plagued this place for centuries. But how? The woman's spirit was powerful, fueled by centuries of anger and pain. I could feel her presence growing stronger with each passing day, her influence seeping into my thoughts, my dreams. I began to see her everywhere in the shadows, in the corners of my vision, in the faces of the people I passed on the street. She was always there, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I knew that if I didn't find a way to appease her, to give her the peace she so desperately sought, she would destroy me just as she had destroyed those before me. I was running out of time. The attacks were becoming more frequent, more violent, and I could feel my grip on reality slipping. The line between the living and the dead was becoming blurred, and I was losing myself in the process. But I couldn't leave, not yet. I was determined to see this through to the end, to uncover the final piece of the puzzle that would unlock the mansion's darkest secret. I had to find out what had really happened to the woman, how she had died, and why her spirit was so full of rage. Only then could I hope to put an end to the haunting and save myself from the same fate as the others who had come before me. With no other options left, I decided to take a step that terrified me to my core. I was going to try to communicate with the spirits directly. It felt insane, even reckless, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the only way to end this nightmare. I researched everything I could about SANCs, reading old books and articles that spoke of ancient rituals and ways to contact the dead. I knew it was dangerous, that I was venturing into a realm that could easily consume me, but I had no choice. The spirits wouldn't let me leave without a fight, and I wasn't about to give up without trying to make peace. The night I chose for the SANs was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you, amplifying every tiny sound. I prepared the room as best I could, following the instructions I'd gathered. Candles were placed in a circle, their flames flickering in the dark, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I sat in the center, feeling the weight of the mansion's history pressing down on me. My heart pounded in my chest as I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and began to call out to the spirits, asking them to show themselves, to tell me what they wanted, why they were so angry. At first, nothing happened. The room remained still, the only sound the soft crackle of the candles. But then, gradually, the temperature began to drop. The air grew thick with a cold that seeped into my bones, making me shiver uncontrollably. I could feel them before I saw them, an overwhelming sense of presence, like a crowd pressing in on all sides. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, deeper, as if they were gathering together, coalescing into something more. My breath hitched in my throat as I opened my eyes, and there they were, the spirits, their forms barely visible, but unmistakably there, surrounding me. Their faces were contorted with rage, their eyes hollow, and their mouths twisted into expressions of pain and anger. They moved closer, circling me, their voices rising in a low, mournful wail that sent chills down my spine. The atmosphere in the room shifted, growing more oppressive with each passing second. I tried to speak, to tell them I was sorry, that I wanted to help, but the words caught in my throat. The spirits didn't seem interested in my apologies. They wanted something more, something I wasn't sure I could give. Their anger was palpable, a living thing that pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. As their voices grew louder, the flames of the candles flickered wildly, some of them snuffing out completely, plunging parts of the room into darkness. The spirits were no longer just angry, they were furious, their energy lashing out at me with a force that made the room tremble. I could feel their hatred, their desire for vengeance, and I realized that they weren't going to let me leave unscathed. My only hope was to offer them something, anything, to appease their wrath. With a shaking voice, I promised to restore their graves, to make right what had been wrong so many years ago. But the spirits didn't seem to care about my promises. They continued to close in, their faces inches from mine, their cold breath brushing against my skin. I could see the leader among them, the woman, her eyes blazing with a fury that threatened to consume everything in its path. She reached out towards me, her fingers icy cold as they brushed against my face, and in that moment, I felt her pain, her sorrow, her unending rage. She wanted justice, retribution for the crimes committed against her, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. I knew then that I was in over my head, that I had awakened something far more powerful than I could handle. The essence had gone horribly wrong. The spirits weren't at peace, they were more enraged than ever, and now their wrath was directed squarely at me. The room began to shake, the walls groaning as if they were about to collapse, and I knew I had to get out. But even as I scrambled to my feet, the spirits followed, their presence suffocating, relentless. I could feel them clawing at me, their energy tearing at my mind, and I knew that if I didn't find a way to escape, they would drag me down into the darkness with them. I stumbled towards the door, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing that this was my last chance. That final night in the mansion was unlike anything I had ever experienced, and I hoped never to face anything like it again. After the ascents, I was left shaken, my nerves frayed, but I knew I had to act quickly. The spirits had given me a choice: leave or face their eternal wrath, and I wasn't about to test their patience any further. As dawn approached, I gathered what little courage I had left and started packing my things. My hands trembled uncontrollably, the weight of the night's events pressing down on me like a vice. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, made my heart race, as if the spirits were still watching, still waiting. The mansion, once a grand estate, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on me with each passing minute. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that those vengeful spirits were lingering just out of sight, ready to strike if I made one wrong move. The air was thick with tension, and I could almost hear their voices, urging me to leave, to never return. I hurried through the halls, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence, trying to push back the rising panic that threatened to overwhelm me. The house seemed determined to hold on to its secrets, to keep me trapped within its cursed walls. As I reached the front door, I hesitated for just a moment, turning back to take one last look at the place that had nearly cost me my life. The mansion loomed in the dim light of dawn, its windows dark and hollow, like empty eyes watching my every move. I could feel the spirits gaze on me, their anger still palpable even as I stood at the threshold of freedom. A shiver ran down my spine, and I knew I couldn't linger any longer. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped outside, the cool morning air hitting me like a breath of fresh life. But even as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I drove away from the mansion, I caught a glimpse of it in my rearview mirror, the shadows shifting within its walls as if the spirits were still moving, still restless. A part of me wanted to forget everything that had happened, to pretend that it was all just a nightmare. But I knew better. The events of those days had left a mark on me, a scar that would never fully heal. The terror of that night would stay with me forever, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of reason, waiting to be unleashed. I swore to myself that I would never speak of what had happened, that I would bury the memory deep within me, just as the mansion had buried its own secrets. But even as I made that vow, I knew it would be impossible to forget. The fear, the helplessness, the sense of being hunted by forces beyond my understanding, it was all too real, too vivid to ever fade away completely. The mansion had taken something from me, something I couldn't quite name, and left me with a chilling reminder that some places are better left undisturbed. As I drove further and further away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow, knowing that I had escaped but also that I had left something unfinished, something that would continue to haunt me in the quiet moments of my life. When I finally reached my apartment, I collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. My mind replayed the events of the past few days over and over, like a broken record that refused to stop. The faces of the spirits, the cold touch of their presence, the terrifying moments when I thought I wouldn't make it out, it all came rushing back, more vivid than ever. I knew that no matter how far I ran, no matter how much time passed, the mansion and its spirits would remain a part of me, a dark shadow lurking in the corners of my memory. And so, as I lay there in the early morning light, I made one final promise to myself. I would never return to that place, never let its horrors take hold of me again. But deep down, I knew that the mansion and the spirits that dwelled within would never truly let me go.